They say Antarctica is the last untouched place on Earth. But what if that's not true? What if beneath its endless ice lies the oldest chapter of human history, one deliberately erased from every record you've ever read? For centuries, explorers, scientists, and even military forces have come here, each leaving with more questions than answers. Satellite images show blurred zones. Old maps hint at a coastline without ice. And classified reports speak of structures that should not exist, hidden miles below the surface. Officially, Antarctica is a land of peace, science, and silence. Unofficially, it is a locked vault, and someone holds the... You are about to step into a place where no sound carries, where the horizon bleeds into the sky, and where the ground beneath your feet might not be natural at all. The further you go, the more you'll feel it. This isn't just a frozen desert, it's a sealed archive. And for reasons you were never meant to know, it has been kept that way. From the deck of an icebreaker ship, the view is hypnotic. Jagged icebergs drift like silent sentinels, each one fractured from the vast ice shelves that guard the coast. They glint under the pale sun, blue shadows curling within their frozen walls. The crew rarely speaks here. It's as if the continent commands silence, as if it's listening. And you find yourself wondering, is that silence empty, or is it full of something? When the first explorers reached this place in the early 20th century, they thought they were venturing into a pristine, untouched world. But what they found instead was a continent that seemed to resist them, swallowing their expeditions in blizzards, cracking their ships with drifting ice, and hiding every clue beneath a shifting white veil. There are places in Antarctica you are not allowed to go, not because of safety, but because of secrecy. Even now, with satellites and advanced mapping, there are restricted sectors hidden from public view. You can see them on certain polar projection maps, areas blurred out, pixelated, or conveniently cropped. Officials say it's nothing, just sensor glitches or incomplete data. But if you've learned anything from history, it's that when those in power tell you there's nothing to see here, there's almost always something to see. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 officially locked down the continent for peaceful scientific research. No military bases, no mining, no territorial disputes. It was, on paper, the most cooperative agreement humanity had ever made. But think about it. Since when do all the world's superpowers agree on anything, especially in the middle of the Cold War? Why would they choose this one place to protect, not from exploitation, but from access? You take a step onto the ice. The crunch beneath your boots echoes into the vast emptiness. Somewhere under your feet could be a mountain range as tall as the Alps, buried, hidden, untouched for millions of years. Somewhere under your feet could be rivers of liquid water flowing in total darkness, warmed by geothermal heat. And if those rivers exist, what else could they carry? Every direction looks the same, endless white under a sky so pale it almost disappears. The emptiness is overwhelming, and yet, you can't shake the feeling that you're walking across the roof of something massive, something deliberate, something that was here long before the ice. The white silence is more than absence, it's a presence, an ancient, patient force that has been waiting. And as you take another step deeper into the continent, you realize that whatever is hidden here has survived not just the cold, but time itself. And perhaps it has been waiting for you. It begins with a flicker on a satellite screen, an anomaly buried deep within the ice sheet, so faint it could almost be dismissed as a data glitch. But when the images are run again and again, the same shapes emerge. Long, ruler-straight lines where nature should only produce chaos. Perfect right angles where ice and rock should only fracture at random. Beneath the surface, hundreds of meters down, something is there. Something not made by glaciers or wind. In the last 2 decades, technology has given us a way to see through the veil. Ground-penetrating radar, airborne ice-penetrating sensors, and high-resolution satellite imaging have pulled back part of the curtain. What they reveal is staggering. Vast formations shaped like walls, corridors, and massive geometric patterns, some stretching for kilometers. From the air, the data renders in ghostly blue and green, the outlines forming as if an ancient city is slowly surfacing in the mind's eye. The structures seem too precise, too deliberate, to be explained away as random subglacial formations. They stand in stark contrast to the chaotic mountains and valleys around them. Some appear aligned to true north, a feature that would require knowledge of Earth's rotation and orientation, knowledge far beyond what Ice Age hunter-gatherers supposedly possessed. Whistleblowers from within certain research programs have claimed that these shapes are not new. They say the earliest radar surveys from the Cold War era already picked them up, and that this is one reason the Antarctic Treaty was rushed into effect. The images, they claim, were locked away in military archives labeled non-terrestrial structures, despite being found right here on Earth. Even mainstream reports, stripped of sensational language, admit there are subglacial anomalies whose formation remains unexplained. A 2018 survey over East Antarctica detected a massive dome-like feature, 3 kilometers wide, resting on bedrock under the ice. Geological models say it shouldn't be there, yet there it is, an unblinking question mark buried in a frozen desert. Imagine standing above such a site, knowing that beneath your feet could be a chamber the size of a cathedral sealed in darkness for tens of thousands of years. Imagine walls engraved with symbols no one alive can read. Imagine air pockets still holding an atmosphere from a world that no longer exists. These discoveries are almost always followed by silence. Teams are pulled from the field, reports are redacted, access to certain coordinates is revoked under the guise of environmental protection. The message is always the same: you don't need to know. And yet, the ice is shifting. Each year, a little more melts. Each year, the tools to see through it become sharper. For the first time in human history, we're beginning to glimpse what has been hidden here since before recorded time. The question is, when we finally see it in full, will we recognize it as part of our world, or proof that we were never the first? The story you've been told is simple. Antarctica has been a frozen wasteland for millions of years, locked in ice long before the first humans walked the Earth. But when you dig deeper into the sediments, the fossils, the tiny fragments of pollen, you begin to hear a different story, one that whispers of a time when this continent was green, warm, and alive. Core samples drilled from deep beneath the ice bring up more than just ancient frozen water. They contain the remnants of plant life, pollen grains from flowering trees, spores from ferns, even traces of conifers. Some are from species that could only grow in temperate or subtropical climates. Geological dating places them tens of millions of years ago. But some researchers argue that the evidence suggests pockets of warmth persisted far longer than mainstream science admits, perhaps well into the age of early humans. Imagine it, Antarctica not as a desert of ice, but as a land of rivers winding through valleys, forests stretching to the horizon, and coastal plains where the sun set in long, golden arcs. A place where herds of prehistoric creatures grazed on lush vegetation, and where humans, or something like humans, could have walked barefoot along sandy shores. Fossilized tree trunks, perfectly preserved, have been found protruding from the melting edges of glaciers. Some are so well kept in the permafrost that you can still see the growth rings. Count the years of a life lived in a climate that should have been impossible here. In certain valleys, shielded from the wind, mosses and lichens still cling to life today, like stubborn echoes of a green world that refuses to fully die. And then there are the animal remains. Fragments of bones belonging to dinosaurs, marine reptiles, and giant birds that once soared over an ice-free Antarctica. But among these, there are stranger finds. Patterns in the rock that resemble carvings. Stones shaped in ways that seem deliberate. Most are dismissed as natural curiosities. But to the few who study them without the filter of academic caution, they hint at something else. Evidence that intelligent beings might have been here when the climate still allowed it. Mainstream geologists say Antarctica's shift into a frozen state was gradual, caused by continental drift and changes in ocean currents. But alternative theories suggest something more sudden, a cataclysm that buried the continent under ice in a geological instant. A rapid pole shift, a shift in Earth's crust, or even a global flood could have plunged this green land into deep freeze almost overnight, trapping whatever lived here in a frozen tomb. If this is true, then the civilization, if there was one, had no time to escape. Their cities, their roads, their records, all entombed, waiting for the day the ice would retreat and the world would remember them. And now, with every year of melting, every satellite scan, we are closer,
growing louder. The question is, are we ready to hear what they have to say?
Long before satellites, before aircraft, before even the first wooden ships reached the southernmost seas, someone drew a map of Antarctica, and they drew it without ice. The most famous of these is the Piri-Reis map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer. On the surviving fragment of parchment, the coastline of South America curves down toward a landmass that modern historians insist could not have been known at the time, Antarctica. But it's not the frozen, jagged outline we know today. Instead, it shows a smooth, detailed shoreline, free of ice, with bays, inlets, and river systems, exactly where modern radar mapping has now confirmed they exist beneath the ice sheet. The official explanation? Pure coincidence. A lucky guess. A composite drawn from older maps of other continents, somehow creating a perfect match to a subglacial coastline no one could have seen for thousands of years. But the Piri-Reis map is not alone. Other ancient charts like the Orontius Phineus map of 1531 and the Buash map of 1737 also depict a southern continent without ice, complete with mountain ranges and rivers in locations that line up uncannily with modern seismic surveys. These maps shouldn't exist. According to mainstream history, Antarctica was first sighted in 1820. Yet here are depictions centuries older, some said to be based on even earlier sources, perhaps relics from a time when parts of the world were mapped by civilizations long forgotten. Piri-Reis himself claimed he compiled his chart using ancient maps, dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and even older ones he called maps of the early kings. The precision is unsettling. Modern scientists have noted that some coastlines on these old maps are drawn as they would appear if projected from above, a viewpoint only possible with aerial observation or advanced mathematical knowledge of Earth's curvature. In the 16th century, that kind of precision was supposed to be impossible. Unless, of course, the map makers weren't the original surveyors. Imagine for a moment an ice-free Antarctica, inhabited, mapped, and passed down through generations until the knowledge became myth, then memory, then lost entirely, except for fragments preserved by later explorers who never knew what they truly had in their hands. These maps, tucked away in dusty archives, might be the last surviving evidence of a civilization that walked this land before it vanished under the ice. Even today, the debate continues in quiet academic circles. Some dismiss the anomalies outright. Others admit, cautiously, that the data matches too well to ignore. And then there are those who suggest that the maps are not just relics but invitations. Coordinates pointing towards something still hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. If these ancient cartographers truly saw Antarctica as it was before the ice, then
About our history has been rewritten.
The year is 1947. The Second World War has ended, but the planet is far from at peace. Rumors swirl through military channels, whispers of strange activity in the southernmost reaches of the globe, activity that demands attention. And so, the United States launches one of the largest expeditions ever sent to Antarctica, Operation High Jump. On paper, it's a scientific mission. In reality, it's a full-scale naval deployment. 13 ships, more than 4,000 personnel, aircraft, helicopters, and enough firepower for a small war. Officially, the goal is to test equipment in extreme conditions and map uncharted territory. Unofficially, no one seems to agree on what they were really there to find. The operation begins smoothly, but within weeks, something changes. The expedition's flagship, the USS Mount Olympus, receives urgent orders. Flights are cut short. Certain areas are declared off-limits. Crews speak of sudden, violent encounters with unknown craft moving at impossible speeds, silent, disc-shaped objects that dart between mountain peaks and vanish over the horizon. One of the most intriguing accounts comes from Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, the mission's leader. In a rare interview after returning, Byrd is quoted as warning that the United States must be prepared to face enemy aircraft that can fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. The statement is quickly buried, dismissed as misinterpretation or mistranslation. But among those who followed the mission closely, the implication is clear. Whatever Byrd saw, it wasn't a weather balloon. The expedition is abruptly cut short, months earlier than planned. Official explanations cite weather conditions and logistical challenges. Yet crew members later hint at something far stranger: losses in men and equipment that could not be publicly acknowledged, and an unspoken understanding that certain parts of Antarctica were not to be approached again. Classified Navy logs from the era remain sealed, fueling decades of speculation. Some suggest the mission stumbled upon remnants of a secret wartime base, possibly of Nazi origin. Others believe they encountered technology that did not belong to any nation on Earth, technology far beyond the jet age that had only just begun. When you stand in Antarctica today, looking out over its untouched horizons, it's difficult to imagine the roar of naval guns or the scream of engines cutting through the cold air. And yet, in 1947, this frozen frontier was the scene of something that rattled even hardened military officers. Operation High Jump remains one of the most heavily scrutinized and most quietly deflected events in Antarctic history. Whatever happened here, it was enough to send the most powerful navy in the world home early. And if the rumors are true, it wasn't the cold that forced them back. It was something waiting in the ice. The idea sounds like the plot of a pulp novel. In the final years of World War II, the Nazis establish a secret base in the most remote, inhospitable place on Earth, Antarctica. Yet buried in fragments of declassified documents, post-war testimonies, and obscure shipping records, the story refuses to die. The alleged project was called Base 211, located somewhere in Queen Maud Land, a sector the Nazis renamed Neuschwabenland after their 1938-1939 Antarctic expedition. Officially, that mission was for whaling surveys and mapping. Unofficially, it brought ships laden with construction equipment, scientists, and military personnel to a frozen coastline where they planted the swastika flag and began something. Survivors of the war whispered that Base 211 was no mere outpost. It was said to be an underground facility carved into the rock beneath a glacier, warmed by geothermal vents. A place where the Reich's top scientists worked on advanced aircraft designs, propulsion systems, and weapons that defied the era's technology. Some even claim they were reverse engineering something they had found there, machines or artifacts far older than humanity's reach. The claims are easy to dismiss until you notice how many post-war intelligence reports mention Nazi interest in Antarctica. British commandos, sent south in the late 1940s, allegedly destroyed hidden supply depots. A Soviet report from 1945 speaks cryptically of German activities in the ice. And then there's the strange persistence of the Haunebu and Vril diskcraft legends, circular flying machines supposedly developed in secret programs, capable of near-silent flight and incredible maneuverability. Skeptics point out the lack of definitive proof. But in the realm of military secrecy, absence of evidence is often the point. What is known is that multiple German U-boats, including U-530 and U-977, surrendered in Argentina months after the war ended, claiming implausible long voyages from Europe. Their logs are incomplete, and their crews offered no clear explanation for their route. Some researchers believe these submarines traveled first to Antarctic waters before heading north to surrender. Then there is the tantalizing possibility that Nazi scientists escaped entirely, vanishing into the ice with their projects intact. Certain conspiracy theories go further still, suggesting that the remnants of the Reich continued their work in hiding, waiting for the day they could re-emerge. In the years since, any investigation into Queen Maud Land has been tightly controlled. The few satellite images available show curious geometric shadows in the snow, straight lines, dark entrances, shapes that seem too perfect to be natural. And in the lore of Antarctic expeditions, Queen Maud Land has become synonymous with restricted. Whether Base 211 ever existed in the way the legends claim remains unproven. Missing submarines to post-war secrecy converge on this one frozen region makes it impossible to ignore. If there is a vault of forbidden technology buried in the ice, perhaps the real question is not whether it's still there, but who controls it now. When most people imagine Antarctica, they picture an endless white void, lifeless, sterile, untouched by the cycles of birth and decay that define the rest of the planet. But beneath the ice, the continent is anything but dead. Over the past few decades, as the edges of Antarctica's glaciers have retreated, they've begun to reveal secrets that challenge everything you've been taught about its past. Perfectly preserved forests, their trunks petrified, yet still upright in the soil where they once grew. Fossilized leaves so detailed you can trace the veins with your fingertip. And bones, thick, ancient bones, belonging to creatures that should have lived in warm, sunlit lands, not here at the bottom of the world. Some of these remains date back over 90 million years, to a time when Antarctica was a swampy, subtropical paradise teeming with life. But there are other finds that are harder to explain. In 2011, researchers in the Trans-Antarctic Mountains uncovered the fossilized skeletons of giant birds, some with wingspans rivaling small airplanes. In other layers, they found shellfish and plant species known to have existed in much more recent epochs, raising the question of whether pockets of habitable land persisted here long after the ice was supposed to have claimed everything. More puzzling still are the microfossils, tiny organisms, some unlike anything found elsewhere on Earth. Certain samples seem to have no clear evolutionary lineage, as if they emerged from a completely separate branch of life. A few are so unusual that scientists quietly speculate they may have originated from meteorite impacts, suggesting the possibility of alien microbes adapting to life in Antarctica's ancient lakes and rivers. Then there are the outliers, the discoveries whispered about but rarely published. Reports of stone tools embedded in glacial debris, geometric patterns etched into rock that, if genuine, would mean intelligent hands worked this land long before modern humans ever existed. Such claims are swiftly dismissed in academic circles, but the silence only fuels speculation. Every fossil pulled from the ice is a fragment of a world that should not exist according to the official timeline. And each fragment forces a deeper question. If life once thrived here, who or what might have walked these lands alongside it? Because if Antarctica was once home to a flourishing ecosystem, then it's not a stretch to imagine that intelligent beings, human or otherwise, could have lived here too. The ice may have buried them, but it has also preserved them. And with each passing year, as the climate changes and the ice retreats, The past is quite literally rising to the surface. Perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: fossils. It begins as faint lines on a radar scan, so straight, so precise, they seem almost like interference. But as the mapping data accumulates, a pattern emerges. Beneath kilometers of ice, shapes take form, perfect circles, rectangles, and corridors that stretch for hundreds of meters. These are not the chaotic fractures of rock under pressure. They are ordered, deliberate, and they should not be there. In 2017, a joint survey by European and American scientists using ice-penetrating radar revealed a particularly striking anomaly. A massive ring-shaped structure buried deep in East Antarctica, nearly 400 kilometers from the coast. Its diameter was more than 400 meters, with interior divisions that resembled chambers or radial supports. Some researchers insisted it was a natural volcanic formation, frozen in place before the ice sheet formed. But others quietly pointed out that the symmetry was too perfect, the angles too exact, as if it had been designed. Elsewhere, under the Wilkesland region, seismic imaging uncovered a vast subglacial depression more than 250 kilometers wide. Officially, it is labeled an impact crater from a prehistoric asteroid strike. Unofficially, certain analysts have compared its geometric anomalies to the kinds of megastructures seen at ancient sites around the world, only on a scale far beyond anything known on the surface. And then there are the tunnel systems. In some radar sweeps, long, evenly spaced voids appear, running parallel to one another for kilometers. In cross-section, they have the clean, arched shape of engineered passageways, not the jagged, irregular look of natural caves. A few even connect to what appear to be large chambers, their ceilings perfectly domed. Whistleblowers claim these tunnels were first detected in classified U.S. Navy surveys during the Cold War. Supposedly, entire teams were sent in through newly exposed ice caves, only to vanish from public record. One declassified memo from the 1960s, heavily redacted, makes a cryptic reference to unidentified subglacial installations and structural integrity beyond known engineering capabilities. If true, these structures would rewrite not only the history of Antarctica, but the history of civilization itself. They would imply that an advanced culture, human or otherwise, had mastered construction in one of the harshest environments on Earth, long before the modern age. Some theorists go further, suggesting these are not the ruins of a lost city, but the upper reaches of something much larger, a complex that extends deep into the bedrock, perhaps connecting to subglacial lakes and geothermal vents. A hidden world beneath the ice, self-sustaining, sealed off for millennia. You imagine standing at the threshold of one of these tunnels, your breath fogging in the frozen air, staring into a blackness that swallows all light. What would you find if you walked inside? Empty halls echoing with ancient silence? Or something still, alive, still watching, waiting for the moment when the ice above finally gives way? Long before satellites revealed Antarctica's hidden shapes, pilots flying over the continent were already reporting strange disturbances, compass needles swinging wildly without warning, instruments that refused to hold a steady bearing, radio signals warping into static. It was as if something beneath the ice was distorting the very field of the Earth itself. Modern surveys have confirmed it. Antarctica is home to some of the most powerful and puzzling magnetic anomalies on the planet. One of the most striking lies deep beneath Wilkes Land, not far from the site of that massive subglacial depression often described as a possible impact crater. On scientific maps, it appears as a concentrated zone of intense magnetic flux, hundreds of kilometers wide, emanating from far below the ice. Officially, researchers attribute these anomalies to differences in the composition of the crust, dense metal-rich rock, ancient volcanic activity, or residual magnetism from geological events millions of years ago. But the symmetry and intensity of certain zones have raised eyebrows. Why are some anomalies shaped like perfect ovals or straight-edged rectangles? Why do they align with subglacial structures identified on radar? Then there's the human element. In 1956, a Royal New Zealand Air Force crew conducting reconnaissance reported their navigational systems behaving erratically while crossing a specific latitude near Queen Maud Land. The pilot described the experience as flying through an invisible storm, with both magnetic and gyroscopic compasses spinning simultaneously, a phenomenon that should have been impossible without severe equipment failure. The aircraft returned intact, yet every instrument was found to be in perfect working order. In more recent years, private expeditions have told of drones and remote sensors failing entirely when passing over certain coordinates, only to resume normal function once moved several kilometers away. Military aircraft, according to persistent rumors, have been rerouted mid-flight to avoid unstable sectors where magnetic interference is known to cause navigation loss. Some scientists argue these anomalies could be linked to massive deposits of iron, or even to unique gravitational effects caused by variations in crust density. But for others, the connection to the radar-detected structures is too hard to ignore. If these readings were coming from engineered materials, vast quantities of metal or an unknown alloy, they could account for both the magnetic distortion and the anomaly's geometric patterns. One particularly persistent theory ties these magnetic hotspots to energy systems, ancient technology buried beneath the ice, still active after untold centuries. In this view, the anomalies aren't geological quirks at all, but signatures of power sources designed to operate in complete isolation, perhaps drawing energy from geothermal heat or the Earth's own magnetic field. Standing above
One of these zones, there is nothing to see, just the same blinding white in every direction. But beneath your boots, something is generating a force strong enough to bend the compass and confuse the machines that guide our modern world. And if the source is not natural, then whoever placed it here understood the planet in ways we are only beginning to grasp. For most people, Antarctica is an empty expanse, too cold, too barren, too hostile for anything to survive beyond the simplest life forms. But talk long enough to the scientists and station crews who've spent winters here, and you'll start to hear a different story. One that doesn't make it into research papers. One told quietly in the mess hall after midnight, when the wind outside howls like a living thing. They speak of movement on the ice, shapes in the distance where no one should be, tall, thin figures walking against the wind without any visible gear. Sometimes they appear for only seconds before vanishing behind a ridge. Other times they stand motionless for minutes, watching. Official reports call these sightings visual distortions, the result of fatigue, low light, and mirages created by extreme temperature gradients. But the consistency of the descriptions across decades is unsettling. Always the same elongated silhouettes, always in the same remote sectors far from any station or known expedition route. There are also accounts of strange lights, not the shimmering green of the aurora, but sharp, directed beams that cut through the snowstorms. These lights sometimes move in perfect formation, gliding silently above the ice before disappearing into the darkness. In 1994, a joint Russian-British research team operating near Lake Vostok allegedly picked up faint radio signals, structured, repeating patterns, not originating from any known station. Attempts to triangulate the source led them toward a heavily restricted zone. Within days, the team was ordered to halt operations and leave the area. Officially, the reason given was logistical reassignment. Some believe these watchers are simply other researchers glimpsed under unusual conditions. Others argue they could be members of classified military units guarding sensitive sites. But the more speculative voices wonder if they are something else entirely, beings adapted to the cold, living in tunnels and caverns beneath the ice, venturing to the surface only rarely. There's an old superstition among some Antarctic crews. If you see the watchers, you don't approach. You turn away. You break line of sight. You pretend you saw nothing. Not out of fear of violence, but because those who try to follow don't always return. In a place this vast, losing someone is tragically easy. A sudden storm can erase all traces of a person within minutes. But when the disappearance coincides with one of these sightings, it's hard not to wonder. Perhaps the strangest part is the silence. Whatever these watchers are, they make no sound, no crunch of footsteps on snow, no engine hum, no shout across the ice, only the wind. and the unshakable sense that you are being observed. And once you felt it, you understand why so many leave Antarctica with the same lingering thought: we are not alone here. If you believe Antarctica is simply a wilderness for scientists to study penguins and glaciers, the paper trail tells a different story. Hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and innocuous titles are documents, fragmented, redacted, and often classified, that hint at discoveries too disruptive to be made public. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, is often praised as a triumph of international cooperation. Yet buried within its clauses and subsequent amendments are provisions that quietly allow for protected zones where entry is strictly forbidden. These are not just dangerous crevasses or wildlife reserves. They include areas far inland, miles from any known hazard, where satellite imagery is conspicuously absent or blurred. Declassified memos from several treaty nations refer to sensitive finds and material quarantine for study. In some cases, the files are so heavily redacted that only a handful of words remain legible: structure, anomalous readings, containment. And then there are the sealed boxes in national archives, their contents labeled under vague project names like Polar Research Initiative or Geophysical Survey B. No public researcher has been granted full access in over half a century. Whistleblowers, few and often discredited, have claimed these archives hold photographic evidence of subglacial ruins, biological samples from unknown species, and artifacts that defy known history. Some go further, alleging that certain items were quietly removed from the continent and now reside in private facilities or underground vaults on other continents. It is not just governments keeping secrets. Major scientific institutions have their own restricted datasets. Satellite passes over certain coordinates are quietly excluded from public repositories. Ice core samples are cataloged but never analyzed outside select labs. When questioned, officials cite data anomalies or unverified results that require further review that never seems to conclude. There are also unexplained incidents of abrupt mission cancellations. In 2016, a large-scale international drill project aiming to bore through 2 miles of ice was halted without warning, despite years of preparation. The official explanation was equipment failure. Off the record, some team members hinted that the drill had struck something solid, something that rang like metal. The secrecy breeds only more questions. If there is nothing to hide, why seal the records for decades? Why restrict access to land no one claims to own? And why, in a world where information flows freely, does Antarctica remain one of the most heavily controlled blind spots on Earth? Some researchers suspect that the archives themselves are the true treasure. Maps, images, and specimens that, if released, could rewrite everything we know about human origins, ancient civilizations, and the possibility of contact with something non-human. And perhaps that's why the files stay locked, their contents seen by only a handful of people alive today. Because once you open that box, there's no closing it again. Piece by piece, the fragments start to align. The blurred satellite images, the radar scans of geometric structures, the fossilized forests and alien microbes, the testimonies of soldiers and scientists who saw things they could not explain, the restricted zones, the sealed archives, the quiet but persistent disappearances. Alone, each could be dismissed. Together, they paint a picture that is far harder to ignore. What if Antarctica is not just a continent, but a vault? A place chosen, perhaps engineered, to conceal the remains of an age that came before ours. An age erased not by accident, but by intent. If the ice is a curtain, then those in power have made sure it stays closed, because behind it lies a truth that would upend our understanding of history, science, and ourselves. Imagine what it would mean if, beneath this frozen expanse, there was proof of a civilization older than any on record, one that mastered technologies we have yet to rediscover, energy systems that drew power from the Earth itself, transportation that defied gravity, knowledge of the stars so precise it could only have come from direct observation or from somewhere beyond our planet. If such evidence were confirmed, every narrative you've been taught, from the slow crawl of human progress to the idea that we are alone, would collapse. The textbooks would need rewriting. The foundations of governments, religions, and economies could shake. And in that upheaval, those who have built their power on controlling the story would have the most to lose. So, instead, the story is managed. The continent is locked down, access is limited, and the few who see too much are bound by secrecy or discredited. The rest of us are left with whispers, anomalies, and the occasional leak, just enough to hint at the edges of the truth, never enough to hold it in our hands. But ice is not eternal. Climate shifts, natural or otherwise, are already peeling it back. Year by year, what was buried is creeping toward the light. And the closer we get, the more urgent the question becomes. Who will control the moment when the curtain falls? You stand again on that endless plain of white, the wind pressing against your face, the horizon blurring into a sky that feels ancient. Somewhere beneath your boots lies something that has slept for tens of thousands of years. Perhaps it is a ruin. Perhaps it is a machine. Perhaps it is something alive. And when the day comes that the ice finally surrenders it, one thing will be certain: the history of our world will never be the same again.